Hello and welcome to the second part of Trubshaw's Theorem Revisited, Take 2. It still is Friday the 22nd of July 2016, 2236 hours. We left off at the zero-dimensional level here, with a bit being a bit and a trit being a trit. Now, so there's the number 2. And it is happy being a number, and it thinks all anybody ever would want from it is being utilized for maths, and that's fine with it. Lo and behold, every now and then, someone, like humans developing computers, or some things such as ongoings in the universe, suddenly demand more of the number 2, or indeed in Trinary the number 3, then merely lend themselves for mathematical purposes. Namely, they demand to encode data. At the moment that somebody demands numbers to encode data, numbers freak out. The number 2 says, eek, universe help me, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. What do they bloody mean I'm supposed to encode data? I am just one. How does that bloody work? Which really means that the number 2 wonders for the movie buffs out there, in one of the Frankenstein movies, the monster asks itself, what am I? If you suddenly demand the number 2 to lend and its entire numeral system to be utilized for encoding data, the number 2 asks itself, what am I? In the sense of, how does this data encoding shit actually work? How does this work for me? How do I make that? I have no fucking idea, I'm just a number 2. And here's getting interesting, because this happens on the zero-dimensional level. Now, the universe is a three-dimensional universe, contrary to what some, or let's not say contrary, let's say irregardless of what some stoned or otherwise slightly removed from my reality physicists might tell you. I assure you the universe is a three-dimensional universe. However, it does encounter certain things that theoretically, and theoretically only, brings it beyond 3 dimensions. Now, the universe has its very own reaction to such cases of being confronted with beyond 3-dimensional things. Namely, it takes the mighty universal hatchet and chops these things up until they at least fall back into 3-dimensionality, or even beyond into 2 or 1-dimensionality. The universe can handle things on these 3 levels. The universe is not accustomed to being asked questions. So the universe is accustomed to being asked questions or to tackle tasks beyond the 3rd dimension. It seldomly, hardly ever, I guess, happens that out of the zero-dimensional, the universe is being asked a question. So what the universe says, and really what number 2's question, what am I, finds as an answer, and that question, what am I, means, help me universe, how am I to do this whole data management shit, is the universe being ever so slightly cryptic and answering number 2 to its questions, what is it? The universe answers, you are one of 4. Why? Because the universe applied that -1 dimensional hatchet to thinking that it would be something that would bring it into the 3rd dimension. It applied it to the 0 dimension, and thus accidentally brings it down to the -1 dimensional. And that is the answer that the bit receives. The bit is being told by the universe, you are one of 4. Which probably makes the bit wonder, what? You are one of 4. And the trit is being told, you are one of 27. And the trit is a little cheekier than the 2. And the trit goes, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? But the universe doesn't give any answer there beyond. and being coerced into treating data, all that the trit does is just bear in mind it is one of 27. That's all the information it got from the universe, that it was one of 27. And lo and behold, taking it into dimensionality, taking it into the first dimension for starters, that all of a sudden winds up at a point where trits cuddle together in groups or bunches of 27. And namely all by itself, by nature, by the universe being like that. And bits cuddle together at groups of 4. Now, as this is in the one-dimensional, I call this a linear trit, as in 1D trit. You can imagine these 27 trits or 4 bits to be in a line, basically. As in 3D space, this is a line. This is not an area, this is not a volumen, a spatial part of 3D space. This is a simple line, this is one-dimensional. That is why I call it a linear trit or a 1D trit. Now, don't let that singular here confuse you or throw you. We are actually talking 27 trits, or in binary 4 bits. A linear bit, or a 1D bit, is actually 4 bits. And a linear trit, or a 1D trit, is actually 27 trits. Trits cuddle together in groups of 27, and bits cuddle together in groups of 4. In a very unscientific manner, you find a sentence written here: any number to the power of itself, which is really the question, what am I, is the number taking itself to its own power. Any number to the power of itself gives one that number's numeral system's data depth, under inverted comma, or informational sponginess per dimension. I love the word sponginess. What does sponginess mean? I have a mug of coffee standing here at my desk. If I were to spill that and get a sponge to clean up the mess, the sponge could only hold so much of the coffee. There's just so much the sponge will hold. That is what I mean by sponginess. You could call it volumen, you could call it data depth, whatever. There's just so much it can hold. You can more scientifically call that data cohesion, or you call it SIC, which stands for System Intrinsic Chunking. Now, system here refers to the numeral system practiced, which means that the binary system has an SIC, a System Intrinsic Chunking, of 4 bits. The trinary system has an SIC, a System Intrinsic Chunking, of 27 trits. That is a natural, thusly set by the universe, natural chunking of the binary system and the trinary system. Not because anybody made it like that, or because it were willfully chunked up like that. In a more scientific way of writing it down here, the system intrinsic chunking in a trinary system is 27 smallest information units of that trinary system, being trits per dimension. That is the important thing to understand, because we are still in the first dimension here. This is where data starts. And to completely and utterly confuse you, I want to show you the case with the bits here. I have split up bits dimensionality in 4 segments here, as you can see. Now, I said that one single bit is 0-dimensional. And yet, if you look down here, 1 is included in that group which takes you up to 4, which resembles the one-dimensionality of bits. Doing things in the binary system, meaning not just doing math with the binary system, but actually using the binary system to encode and hold and display and represent data and information, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 bits wide, it is within the realm of the one-dimensional for the binary system. Starting with 5 bits wide, leading up to and including 16 bits wide, which is this here, it becomes 2-dimensional, and starting with 17 bits wide, up to and including 64 bits wide, it is actually 3-dimensional. The one with which I want to confuse you is that very first one. Now I explained to you before that one single bit is zero-dimensional, and yet here I have it down in the realm of one-dimensionality. The reason is that this is where it starts from the mathematical creature that it is. But if you utilize even a single bit for data purposes, already one bit in itself and by itself is one-dimensional. Okay? That is what you have to understand. So for the binary system, 1, 2, 3, 4 bits wide means the one-dimensional realm, 5 to 16 bits wide is the two-dimensional realm, and 17 to 64 bits wide is the three-dimensional realm. That is how it works in the binary system. And I just wanted to explain to you how even one single bit, so it's not that this starts at 4, this one here, one-dimensionality. This is the max count of one-dimensionality, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and there one-dimensionality ends, and 5 to 16 is two-dimensionality, and 17 to 64 is three-dimensionality. This is how the thing works, okay? But the important thing is the system intrinsic chunking, because the system intrinsic chunking stands for per dimension, which means that the 27, let's start with the binary here, these four bits become 16 bits if you go to the second dimension, just because it is two-dimensional now. It is 4 by 4 bits. And it becomes 64 bits because it becomes three-dimensional, 4 by 4 by 4 bits. That is how this thing works. I call this a linear trig if it is one-dimensional. You could call it a 1D trig, a square trig, or a 2D trig, a cubic trig, or a 3D trig. Now, chances are you find square and cubic to be misleading, because you would expect something to be to the second and to the third power, when in fact you might be prone to put in here with the square trigs a 2 up here rather than a 6. You must not forget to factor in the number itself to get the true data depth, and to understand that you are not using this in a mathematical context, but actually to represent data. Okay, the thing in the past where people had a wrong understanding was actually how data works dimensionally. People started people didn't understand that the 1 already starts as a zero-dimensional entity. People had the 1 start as the one-dimensional, and that, especially in the binary field, brought them to consider, depending on how you look at it, 2 or 4 as two-dimensional, and so on. They just had their numbers a little wrong because they didn't understand how exactly this unfolds into space. Now you will find out that it says here semi-theoretic. The reason why it says semi-theoretic is because this universe is three-dimensional. As such, two-dimensionality and one-dimensionality are, if you will, subsets of three-dimensionality, unlike zero-dimensionality, because this really is non-dimensionality, and non-dimensionality is not a subset of three-dimensionality. But it is only semi-theoretic because the universe always is three-dimensional. So even if you only were to do something 4 bits wide, in truth, the universe makes it happen at 64 bits wide. In fact, here we wind up at what I call the efficiency threshold. In the first video, I called it efficiency thresholds. And the point where efficiency became a topic was that there are people out there developing binary hardware beyond 64 bits wide, 128 bit and even beyond that. And beneath, or beyond I should say, in this table it is beneath, if you go beyond the third dimension, if you go into the fourth dimension, which starts at 65 bit wide in the binary system, if you go to there and beyond, you're being inefficient, because the universe is forced to chop that shit up again, to have it in devourable chunks that can be managed in three-dimensionality. Okay, and depending on what size of chunks you get, when it's, for instance, I'll give you a very concrete example. The thing you need to understand is that although a 1-bit process or let's say, can I give you a nice example here? The universe generally operates in a three-dimensional way, and its ability to solve things on the two-dimensional and the one-dimensional level is, in an analogy sense, downwards compatibility. The universe is dimensionally downwards compatible. Its natural way of running things is three-dimensional, however, it is downwards compatible. It is ever so slightly less efficient if the universe is actually doing things in two-dimensional or only one-dimensional things. Now, it can do it like that, but it is ever so slightly less efficient. Less efficient does not mean more inefficient. As you go up here, it becomes more and more and more efficient. Once you cross that line, it becomes more and more and more inefficient. So up to this direction, you improve efficiency until you arrive at the 64-bit. Taking it one single bit beyond there in width, and beyond that, you maximize inefficiency. Because the universe is forced to chunk that shit up by applying the universal, what do we call it? The universal hatchet. Which for the binary system works that way, that for instance, if you coerced a 65-bit width onto the binary system, the universe would chop that up into 4 individual processes. Namely, best as possible, equally sized. And what you would wind up with, if you take 65 and chop them up in best as possible equal size, is you would have 116, another 116, another 116, and 117. And as you can see here, only the 17 one would actually be a three-dimensional process, and the other 3 would actually be relegated, so to speak, to two-dimensional processes. And the difference lies therein that a 65, or any chopping up that you force the universe to do, makes it less efficient, because the universe will partially solve what you coerce its way with 65 bits wide in a two-dimensional way. And that is how the inefficiency creeps in. And this can get horrendous. Add to the fact that within its normal range of dimensions, it knows that the structure of data is orderly, so to speak. And that when it applies that quartering hatchet, it actually cleanly, surgically precise cuts away a dimension to chop this up into remainderless dimensional individual processes. If you thrust 65 bits or anything beyond there its way, the universe, I claim, has no precise idea how exactly to chop that up. It will chop it up best as it can to wind up with best as possible 4 equally sized parts. And it will always leave, don't worry about this, it will not destroy any information, because one will always remain intact because it's the smallest information unit, which is why you'll have not 16 point, in the case before from the 65, you will not have 16.25 bits, because you can have 25 bits, 0.25. You can only have a full bit. The universe's universal hatchet respects the smallest information unit size of 1 bit in the binary system. But it will be inefficient because, and this is once more what is to be learned or understood about Trubshaw's theorem. Trubshaw's theorem points out to the world that binary, if utilized for data, happens to be running at 64 bits wide. Even 35 years ago, the Commodore 64, which was an 8-bit machine, maybe your 8-bit machine just utilized 8 bits, but that didn't change anything about the fact that, as far as the universe is concerned, binary for data runs in that three-dimensional universe that this, our universe, is at 64-bit wide. Always does, always did, always will do. Right? So just because you don't utilize all 64 bits doesn't mean that the universe doesn't run binary in 64 bits wide. The universe runs binary in 64 bits wide, not narrower, but not broader. that is to be learned via Trubshaw's theorem. And that all the people who develop stuff that is 128-bit or beyond that even, they are actually developing into the realm of inefficiency. I want to show you something. See, the thing about 64-bit, 64-bit doesn't really, to me at least, 64-bit doesn't really sound like much. You know, it's 64-bit, okay? You know, my old Commodore 64 had 8-bit, okay? So 64 is 8 times that much. No, sorry, not 8 times that much. 6 times that much. This is fascinating, just sitting on my multiplication skills right now. Okay, this is a little shocking. Don't be concerned about that. This is actually sabotaging routines placed in my brain. Remarkable. Yeah, 8 times as much, okay. They shot that down. I had it right at first. So, anyhow, don't let that concern you. It's just facsimile having 6 some sabotaging routines in me. 64-bit doesn't really say much. It doesn't give people an understanding of what incredible data width that really is. Okay? Because it's just 8 times as much. It sounds as if it were only 8 times as much than on my Commodore 64. But I want to show you something. Now, back in the day, here we have the value ranges for the binary realm, right? 1 bit gives you 2 different values, 2 bits gives you 4 different values, 3 bits that, 4 bits that, and 8-bit would give you 256 different possible values. That was really the 8-bit width, 256 values. The width is actually clearly represented by giving you the value ranges that it represents. 8-bit is very abstract, it doesn't tell anything. That it stands for 256 possible values, that is really the width and where you get to see the width. Now, in the olden days, people had these numbers down pretty well. In the 8-bit days, come the 16-bit days, people had these numbers down pretty well. Beyond the 16-bit days, it rapidly faded to be down well. Here we'd be at 32 bits. But beyond that, people completely not ceased to give a fuck. So that hardly anybody out there actually is aware of the fact that today, in the day of 64-bit machines, this here, forget the blue highlighting here, this one with the 18, this one is the actual data width of 64-bit. This is what 64-bit actually means. Now, if you look at this number, this is millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, quintillions. 18 quintillion values. 18 quintillions. Quintillions. That is the data width that 64-bit represents. So contrary to what it sounds like, that it was just 8 times the data width of my Commodore 64, this is actually 72 quadrillion times the data width of my Commodore 64. Believe this or not. Actually do please, because these are the actual numbers. 64-bit is a data width of 18 quintillion. Okay, you need to understand that the universe was very generous with the binary system. The universe said, well, look here, binary system, I mean, as 1 doesn't lend itself for a system at all due to the nature of it just being 1. You're the first number that lends itself to a system, and with you already, I saw to it that you operate 64 bits wide in 3D, because this universe is 3-dimensional, and in this 3-dimensional universe, the binary system operates at 64-bit wide all the time. Even if you use fewer bits, it always does that 64-bit wide. And what that means is 18 quintillion different values. That is very generous of the universe. Which means that I in no way, shape, or manner want to belittle or diss or criticize or whatever the binary system. I love the binary system. I believe that at 64-bit wide, it will, for decades, plural, to come, allow all new development, but you will have to keep the width of it at 64-bit. You have to optimize anything else that goes into system architecture. There's tons you can optimize into for the next decades and decades and decades, all new binary machines, but none of them should ever cross this here fed line beyond 64-bit wide, because the universe would be forced to chop that up. Now, not to be misunderstood here, I want to make something very clear. There is hardware out there that runs on 128. Some hardware does things 128. What will make it inefficient is not merely the fact that you have 128-bit hardware. Namely, what matters is what you run on it. If you run 64-bit wide on it, or anything up to 64-bit wide, your 128-bit hardware will be just as efficient as if it were 64-bit hardware. But the moment you run something on it 65-bit wide or wider, up to 128, say, on the 128 hardware, that is when you will actually start to note how inefficient it is. So I am not saying that, what matters is what you do with the hardware, not the nature of the hardware as such. If you don't task your 128-bit hardware with anything beyond 64-bit, it will perform without any inefficiencies. But if you actually make use of those 128-bit in binary fashion, you should understand that the universe will kind of sort of wonder what the fuck you're actually doing, because here it is, the universe giving you a reality body check and kind of reminding you of the fact that the binary system in the universe, this 3D universe that we inhabit, is actually 64 bits wide at 64 bits wide only. Period. End of story. Okay? 18 quintillion. That is a lot. It is magnificent. Still, there are people who might argue, well, but what if we want to make it wider? Fine. Make it wider than 18 possible value, 18 quintillion possible values, just not in binary hardware. What you have to do is not build 128-bit or 256-bit or whatnot, not beyond 64-bit hardware, but trit hardware. You will have to go to trinary with your hardware. And if you here in this column you have the trinary value ranges, so 18 quintillion would put you hereabouts, in between these two. So 40 trit, these are trits actually. So 64 bits have 18 quintillion. 40 trits would have 12 quintillion. 41 trits would have 36 quintillion. So at 41 bits already, you would have pretty much twice the number, sheer width-wise, twice the width, the data width that you would have at 64-bit. And in fact, as you see, I grouped them in three here because in the trinary world, only the third of each group of three will actually be the practice generation. So what they will just as there were no 17-bit computers, so and in trinary machines it will only be the full three, which means that the generation you will have practiced in the trinary computer will be this one here. The next logical step beyond the 64-bit wide binary hardware architecture is the 42 trit wide trinary architecture, which comes at a width of 109 quintillion, which is pretty much 6 times as wide. That is the first step, hardware-wise, clearly beyond, if you really want to expand the width of data. And here it's getting very interesting. So 64-bit is the limit for three-dimensionality. Okay, this is what it maxes out, so to speak. Actually, it doesn't max out. Maxing out is not quite the right way to put it, because binary always runs on 64, but this is how you can use it to 100%, so to speak. Okay? Whereas the next logical step, which would be 42 trits wide, 42 would just about be at the beginning of the two-dimensional realm. just to give you a certain understanding of the unbelievable difference and room that you have in the three-dimensional, in the trinary system compared to the binary system. The next logical step of 42 traits don't even is in the three-dimensional range. It is in the two-dimensional for the trinary system. Okay, and the trinary system goes all the way up to 19,683 traits wide, which is a number. If I were to, I'm not even sure if numbers could actually calculate this out, but it would be a number where I'd probably spend like half a minute just scrolling the scroll bar to give you the entire number. Okay, that is the number you would get at 19,000, the width, so to speak, the possible values you would get from 19,683 traits. Okay, so what this means is that it is not at all that way that the industry should say, oh no, we are at the end of the universe, we are touching the borders of the universe, what are we to do now, we cannot continue to develop hardware. Oh, shut the fuck up. Yes, you can. You just have to take it to Trinary. Because in Trinary, sorry, I'm on the completely wrong document here. In Trinary, with 40 to 42 traits, you have just stumbled into two-dimensional territory. Okay? You have, for the next couple of hundreds of years, hands down, enough room to further improve on the width you practice in trinary hardware. I just want to show you how, nonetheless, even the trinary system has, with exactly the same formula, a clear efficiency threshold. And if we ever, with our technology, arrive at that threshold, we have to take it to the system based on 4, the quaternary, which would have its 3D threshold as 16,770,216 quadrats. And it would cuddle up, its system intrinsic chunking would be in groups of 256. That would be the system based on 4, the quaternary system. Such as in the human genome, ACGT, or U instead of T for the RNA, there is a case of something being encoded in quaternary fashion. And the thing to understand is that in nature, and when I say nature, primarily I mean this here planet and all on it that lives, but really in physics, I dare say, anything out there to be found, chemistry and whatnot, non-organic chemistry, and so on and so forth, all of this, wherever you find in the periodic table, if you can analyze the underlying maths and figure which numeric system is actually being utilized, you will find out that everything out there in the universe, or the other way around, nothing out there in the universe ever becomes inefficient by going beyond the third dimension. And you will also find, and this is a prognosis that I make, you will also find cases where you will find out that these dimensional limits are considered, in that you will find things that don't, for instance, if they're done trinary, will not go beyond 729, just because there is no need for nature to go beyond 729. There will be variety, so to speak, or data width, let's call it that. Variety is a little hijackable word for the crazies out there. Data width wise, you will find out that some things in nature are practiced one-dimensionally, some things two-dimensionally, and some things outright three-dimensionally. When it comes to how, here in the binary system as explained, things spread up between these 3 dimensions. But you will not find anything out there in nature that is ever inefficient, as in taking it beyond the 3rd dimension. People in the industry and in this field of science, computing science, have to accept that the binary system is something that the universe has, since it exists, worked 64 bits wide and not wider. You can, once more, I want to make this clear, the universe does not explode if you do binary for data beyond 64-bit. No, it does not. Just that it will not be efficient. And as scientists, you should abhor inefficiency, especially if you know about it. And as people in the hardware industry who claim to be engineers and to want progress and advance the field and whatnot, you should also shy away from knowingly develop inefficient products. And what we are going to do at Flow, see, some people might ask, why on earth would you do a computer that is completely binary and then emulate a trinary computer on it? So that when piecemeal the true trinary hardware chunks start arriving, we can just slowly transgressing start building them into our machines and have the advantage of having ultra experience on anything trinary, of having a trinary system architecture, having a trinary operating system, of having trinary games and applications and whatnot. And of course, to make the users out there familiar with the trinary system, especially considering how we will make home computers. I do want to take you all the way back to the glorious home computer days when kids all over Europe in particular, to a certain extent even in the USA and other places on the globe, but in Europe in particular, Europe always was home computer land. And your typical kid back then, or at least of the male variant, was familiar with, for instance, the binary system. And we will reintroduce home computer, and we will not do it. I mean, we will explain on the binary system too, but primarily we will explain on the trinary system. And we will rear an entire generation that will be familiar with the trinary system, even if at first the hardware itself will be completely binary and all the trinary would just be emulated. We will do the pioneering work. Okay? That is what we'll do. So, just in case people are wondering why would anyone bother doing a trinary computer, because you out there have reached the limits of the binary system, at least when it comes to, see, here's something funny. I did mention here in this paragraph, it mentions RAM. With some things, the solution to the inefficiency is stupefyingly simple. You just have bank switching again. That's all you gotta do. Okay, once you figure, okay, we can only address RAM 64 wide, well, no biggie, we'll just bank switch again, like we did back a long time ago. That's all you have to do, bank switching. And you can still have, in total, more address space than what 64 bits wide will allow you to address. So there is a case of a very simple solution, right? So don't sweat it, don't go panicky or something. Just understand that Trubshaw's theorem is that which explains to you that any numerical system, by a very simplistic formula, shows where its limits are for one-dimensionality, two-dimensionality, and in particular three-dimensionality. And understand ye out there that there is a big fat black line of efficiency. And anything beneath that line is not efficient, but inefficient. The binary system utilized for data maxes out or works at 64 bits wide. Not because Bill Gates bloody invented it like that or anybody else, just because the universe has the binary system work like that. Intrinsic in the nature of the binary system utilized for storing and representing data is that it works 64 bits wide. Get over it. It is 18 quintillion different values. If you repair or improve other parts of your system architecture, you will find that even with 64-bit wide architecture, you will be able to do magnificent things. And even 15 years from now, people will be able to publish binary hardware that will still be 64-bit wide and yet wipe the floor with the binary hardware published today. Okay? Don't go panicky over this. Just do understand that the universe said to you, hello there, I just gave you a nice reality body check. You have reached the limits of binary. And you apparently didn't get it because there you are producing 128-bit wide, and what the fuck? When you should just take it over to this here, say, 42 trig. Now, I don't know how long this video, unfortunately I don't have a timer for the length of this video running anywhere, so I'll get to the end of this video. I think I explained to you what Trubshaw's theorem is, namely that there are efficiency thresholds. The universe is three-dimensional. Numeral systems, if utilized for data rather than mere mathematics, do have a limit of efficiency. Don't take it beyond there. If you reach these limits, switch to a more appropriate numeric system, such as going from binary to trinary. But trinary itself offers you such an unimaginable amount of space here that for most of our lifetimes, and this is so funny considering how out there is Fix Mundi doing in mankind. Right now, as I'm seeing the recording this, I am 100% certain that mankind will never live to see the day where they will actually develop technology that will reach this limit here of 19,683 trits wide. Okay, in fact, right now I doubt that this limit is at all reachable. But then, maybe I'm a little too realistic. Maybe that's my problem. So, I think I explained this. Is there anything else that I should explain about? Here is something. This is just a little. This is almost off topic. Now, when I said this holds true for any numeral system, that is true. Some people might say, well, what about if you base a numeral system on infinity? Now, infinity is not a number, okay? And I am fully aware of infinity not being a number. Thus, you cannot really go and subject it to, make use of it in algebra and subject it to arithmetic things and so on and so forth, because that's not a bloody number. The interesting thing, though, is that typically that only is a problem if you use it alongside actual numbers. If you don't have any actual numbers involved, you might find out that on a maybe more philosophical than strictly mathematical level, some of the actual arithmetics and algebra actually do work. And here's an interesting thing. This is really just a crazy thought, because it goes to show a nice little effect. If you were to base your system for data on infinity, so if here, for instance, instead of 3 and 3, it were to say infinity, what you would get is infinity to the power of 0, which would be 1. And if that infinite, as in trinary would make a trit, infinity would make an infinite, if that one infinite were to ask the universe, what am I? The universe would do that, and only use the -1 here, infinity to the power of -1 times infinity, which really means infinity to the power of negative infinity, and that, interestingly enough, results at 0. Namely, to be precise, that true 0, which is the 0.0 non-periodical rather than the 0.00000 periodical, which we commonly use as 0. And that really means that the universe cannot make use of infinity in a data structure. And it really also means -1 is the inverse vector to cut down a dimensional size, namely by how much would it shrink? By 1/20, or by, it would be brought down by 1/27th part, so to speak. And as this would be brought down by nothing, it just goes to show how infinity is infinity. Because if you try to shrink infinity, you still get infinity. But that just as a little aside, not having to do anything much with anything else. I wanted to mention something else here. Yeah, just briefly. The emulation. This table is thwarted in itself, so don't try to make sense of it as it is presented here. Here you have 5 trits, giving you 243 different values. The emulation on the binary is going to work that way, that we will have a 5 and 8 emulation. So we will emulate 5 trits in 8 bits, meaning 243 of the possible 256 values will be utilized for the emulation. that results in an efficiency degree of only 94.92%, which means the emulating as such will cost us something like 5% of the resources / performance, which is bearable. Okay, I think it is pretty bearable, 5%. Some people might say that's outright unbearable. I say it is pretty bearable, especially if you consider that the trinary system allows for things, particular things admittedly only, that the binary system is not overly good at. I give you one specific example, that is sorting algorithms. Now, in our binary computing world, we know all manners of sorting algorithms, and they differ greatly, and namely the algorithm differs greatly, but what they all have in common is that they operate in a binary fashion, which means they take one element and compare it with one other element in order to do their sorting. Now, which other element that is and in which sequence they're all compared, that is a question of which algorithm do you use, but what is universally true for all binary sorting algorithms is that one element is only ever compared with one other element at the same time, whereas trinary allows you to compare one element with two other elements at the same time. And that alone, that becoming doable in one work step, okay, at the same time compare one element not just with one other element, but with two other elements, that boosts anything in the realm of sorting algorithms. Namely, to an extent that the 5%, or a little over 5%, that the emulation costs us is ridiculously pointless to even mention. You know, the sorting on trinary machines, the performance of sorting algorithms on trinary machines will wipe the floor with sorting algorithms on binary machines. And there's other fields like anything pertaining to trigonometry. You will find that 3 lends itself much better for that stuff than 2. Matter of fact, talking about that, when I said that people will be introduced, namely the owners of the Flea computer, will be introduced to the trinary system, just as in the binary world, the octal and in particular the hexadecimal system were very quickly natural companions to the binary system, in the trinary system it will be very quickly evident that the duodecimal system, that based on 12, will be the natural companion there. And the system of 12 is a nice system because you've got 2 in it, you've got 3 in it, and you've got 4 in it. And you can do a lot of shit there. So trinary offers you all manners of advantages over binary, which work to that extent that the first generation of trinary hardware might not even necessarily have to be 42 trit. It might be as early as 39 trit, which merely brings 4 quadrillion and hence is narrower, just 4.5 here as a factor in between, but still, considering how, if you get the remainder of the architecture right, you could still have something that ballpark performs on the same level and yet lends itself significantly more to tasks like sorting shit and so on and so forth, right? So you don't even have to start trinary here. You can start trinary here, and this is really referring to the high end of the market, right? Not the supercomputer market. That's not what I'm talking about. Supercomputers ideally ought to start here in the trinary. Even the first generation of supercomputers in trinary should start here, if not here, actually. So trinary, just please, dear industry and dear field of computing, understand that you should slowly but surely change over to trinary because of Trubshaw's theorem and because of the binary system being run by the universe at 64 bits wide ever since the dawn of time, and that the universe won't fucking change the way it runs the binary system just because you build 128-bit or beyond hardware. The binary system runs at 64-bit wide. Change the remainder of your architecture, go back to old school tricks like bank switching and so on and so forth. Don't widen it up beyond 64-bit because it becomes inefficient. Okay? And bear in mind that all of this applies to any other application outside of the field of computing. Did you find this in biology, in chemistry and whatnot, where you have research done to create new materials and so on and so forth? Understand these mechanisms. And that is almost the last thing. I want to go back to this here. Here actually. There used to be a German author called Ernst Theodor Amadeus Hoffmann, who wrote something once about 150 years, not quite, or something, 140 years ago I think, called Meister Floh. This here character is Meister Floh, and it is something like a bit of a novel-length fairy tale, or at least novella-length fairy tale. It shows its age. It didn't age all that well, I think, personally, but it is a nice story nonetheless, and the character is very nice. And the little device here that Meister Floh, Master Flea, places in the eye of the character allows the character to read the minds of those around him, which is why, considering how I am battling Fex Mundi's realm and attempt to do in completely mankind with mind enslavement and utter subjection and mind peeking and poking and so on and so forth, I just find the story incredibly appropriate. I suggest that all Fex Mundi people go and read Hoffmann's Meister Floh, and this character here will be the mascot of our Flea home computer, and that is why I chose to have the artwork here, for no other reason. Just so to close that circle from the beginning of part one, what is this video about? Or what is this artwork about? So that was Trubshaw's theorem. Trubshaw's theorem is simply the universe having somehow brought me to understand, just because I stumbled across how the trinary system differs from the binary system and how it expands and how it, here's a technical term, how it six, so to speak, how its system intrinsically chunks by itself depending on which numeric system you practice. Think of this, once more as an analogy, kind of like, if you think of this as an atom maybe, then think of this as the molecules that these atoms are most likely to cuddle together as, okay? Bits cuddle together in nibbles. Typically, I mean, there's a lot of terms for a 4-bit set of bits. This is a nibble. This might be called a tribble, if you will, because it's trinary. I'm not sure if that word is so good or not, but 27 is the SIC, the system intrinsic chunking per dimension. This is just the first dimension. You fold it up another time, you get 2 dimensions, and you fold it up a third time to receive 3 dimensions, giving you 19,683 tris wide, and in binary 444, giving you 64 bits wide. This is how the universe runs binary used for encoding data. This is how the universe runs trinary used for encoding data. These are the limits of efficiency. You can take it beyond that, but you will increase the inefficiency. So don't do that. And understand that how these numbers really represent these transitions between the dimensionality here. And that's it. That is Trubshaw's theorem. Thank you.